Go ahead and take all your Bitcoin price predictions and your models and throw them in the trash. They're all destroyed. Everything has changed. Remember when we told you the fiat money printer was back? Well, we underestimated that big time. And we already know about the banking crisis. And bailing out banks is old news. But J. Powell and the gang are officially bailing out the Bank of Japan. What does this mean? Well, strap in and 10x wherever you thought Bitcoin might be headed. No one is prepared for what's coming and what has just begun. Let's go ahead and dive into clown world, and it is not looking good. We got a billionaire real estate investor expecting 1 or 2 bank failures a week. That's interesting. That doesn't sound good, but our loving overlords like to tell us that the economy is strong. Inflation's fine, it's going away. But you and I aren't that regarded, and we know better. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. Here is the news of the day. I mean, bailing out banks is cool and all, but bailing out central banks, well, that's just even cooler. Remember, we just covered this last week. The intervention, what was going to happen? Are there signs of things cracking beneath the surface? And Marty Bent just dropped a great piece. Let's pick it up where we left off last week. The inability of the Bank of Japan to prevent the yen from running higher. Well, that's obviously spooked the US Treasury and the Fed, because yesterday morning it was announced that the US and Japan had agreed on an FX intervention plan via a swap line through the US, which is going to supply Japan with dollars in exchange for yen. Like, how I visualize this is if you think back to the shitcoin, stable coin, Terra Luna, and how they had to start selling massive coin to hold up their peg, and then it all came crashing down. Well, that's what you're looking at here, except it's the yen, which is just a shitcoin. It's just a fiat shitcoin, but then they're trying to back it up with another shitcoin in the dollar. Well, let's continue. The last thing the US needs right now is for Japan to begin selling its treasuries en masse so they can get dollars to defend the yen. I imagine the conversation went something like this: don't touch those treasuries. We'll just give you the dollars that we print out of thin air, and that our advisor to the president doesn't even know how the monetary system works.
The government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do?
Mother of God, we are so when they sell bonds, that means they're borrowing. Okay? There's been this big debate in the MMTers, the modern monetary theory. Why do we borrow when we could just print everything? Well, the obvious answer is that if you were to just print everything, you would go into a hyperinflation death spiral for the ages. Not to mention, in doing so, it would signal to the market that you are no longer capable of carrying or servicing that debt. Therefore, all of the treasuries that you currently have out, which is trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, would not be re-upped. Those would sit out there. There would be no buyers for them. Interest rates would go through the roof, and you would have to monetize the entirety of the debt because only a total lunatic would continue to buy U.S. treasuries. That's the reason, doofus.
And while that may not seem like a very big deal to most, this is a strong signal that something is terribly wrong in both Japan and the US. The Japanese have lost control. Remember all their yield curve intervention? Well, that was all for naught. And then the pressure from the Fed holding rates as high as they have, as long as they have, there is little they can do to turn the tide at the moment. The Treasury and Fed over here in the US are petrified. And we know the spring of last year, Silvergate Silicon, well, it made it abundantly clear that banks are not sufficiently capitalized to weather declining Treasury prices, despite the bullshit that they're feeding you. Bond auctions, not going great and becoming more common for the Treasury, the largest holder of bonds in the world. Well, they're getting close to the point of, well, they're going to be forced to sell. It makes sense the US stepped in to bail out the Bank of Japan because they needed the market to believe that everything is fine. Then you got to think, well, inflation most certainly has not been tamed, and the Fed wouldn't be keeping rates higher for longer in an attempt to keep prices down if, inflation was fine. Now, if this goes as predicted and the FX swap line proves to be nothing more than a band-aid over a bullet wound and Japan is forced to sell their treasuries just to defend the yen, well, things could get really hairy really fast. Treasuries being offloaded by Japan would reignite the banking crisis here in the US, which is already, as we just saw, expect 2 banks to collapse a week, but this is going to force the Fed to step in with more QE, more than we anticipated before. Everybody, don't look now, ladies and gentlemen, but M2 is on the rise again, and it's going to be rising faster than we have ever imagined, faster than anything we've ever seen. This next bailout will make 2020 look like absolute chump change. So what does that do to Bitcoin's price? Well, block former Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, and he's usually pretty humble. He just issued his most bullish Bitcoin forecast ever. He's calling for 1 million by 2030. And this is where I'm saying you might as well 10x that given the current situation and the acceleration of the fiat system's decline and demise. We have this article from Finbold. Of course, they're talking about voodoo. Bitcoin triggers hidden buy signal. Is Bitcoin set for an explosive rally? I'll tell you the buy signal. How's this for a buy signal? The US ETFs are buying 1,626 Bitcoin a day. MicroStrategy is buying about 200 Bitcoin a day. Tether is buying 70 Bitcoin a day. There are only 450 Bitcoin mined a day now. The total aggregate demand is likely 5 to 10x the supply. You better plan accordingly.
I've always said that Bitcoin has no top because fiat money has no bottom. People will no longer accept fiat money for Bitcoin. They'll be like, oh, what? That's like, no. So here's $1 million, here's $10 million. I want one Bitcoin. Like, no way, amigo. We don't want that shit. It's worthless.
If you study history, you're going to find that the currency collapsed thousands of times. In fact, on average, it collapses everywhere. It collapses everywhere on average every 50 years.
That is not factoring in what's about to happen with an accelerated banking crisis, and we have the US bailing out a central bank. This is absolutely wild. Think back to the Genesis block, and I want you to think about what's going on in the world today. Remember Chancellor on the brink of second bailout? Well, we've got a slew of chancellors right now, and we have the US bailing out another central bank, one of the biggest currencies in the world, and they're just barely trying to keep things afloat to maintain the illusion that everything is fine. These are the type of things that lead people to make massive moves really fast. This is where that gradually then suddenly really starts to pick up and accelerate. Now we can take a look. Harvest is planning to open their Hong Kong Bitcoin ETF to mainland China. This is absolutely massive. And again, demand is only picking up. The supply isn't going anywhere. It's only dwindling. You think the Bitcoin ETFs were massive? There's even bigger, more bullish news out of the EU. The financial watchdog ESMA is exploring the integration of Bitcoin into its $12 trillion mutual fund market. You can probably count on an easy 100 billion flowing just from there alone into Bitcoin. We got news banks are buying Bitcoin ETFs, so Bitcoin game theory is playing out on every front possible. No one can deny it, and everyone will have to hold it or go the way of the dodo bird. Just take a look at this. SEC filings are showing that the Rothschilds have 3.6 million in Bitcoin ETFs. Look, guys, everyone laughed at you, but we know what we just went through. Those of you who don't know, this is what it was like hodling through that 2022 bear market.
I'm super excited. It was really tough. It was fun. I enjoyed it. It was definitely a different ballgame, but I had a blast, so thank you.
Guys, absolutely no one is bullish enough. This news is massive. Money printer going burr. How long can it continue? And we have Warren Davidson here retweeted Marty Bent, and he just nails it. If something can't continue, it will eventually stop. When the music stops, you better not be sitting on zero.
It's now the world's most popular investment asset. It's novel, it's digital, it's global, it's unique. And it's uncorrelated to traditional risk assets because it doesn't come with exposure to any given country, currency, company, quarterly result, product cycle, competitor, not to weather, not to war, not to an employee base or supply chain. And so that makes it a natural addition to the portfolio of a responsible investor. And now people are beginning to realize that there's 10 times as much demand for Bitcoin coming in through these ETFs as there is supply coming from the natural sellers who are the miners.
And with that, let's take a minute to recognize our sponsors, the Bitcoin Way, because buying Bitcoin and taking self-custody of your Bitcoin have never been more important. Bringing over 25 years of experience in cybersecurity, the Bitcoin Way is your IT team in the Bitcoin world. They'll help take you from that why Bitcoin to the how Bitcoin. From setting up your first wallet node all the way up to inheritance planning, accepting Bitcoin payments for your business. They cover all aspects of Bitcoin security and privacy. They even work with their clients to configure routers, devices, and networks. Also, not to mention UTXO management, in short for everything in Bitcoin, sovereignty and privacy related, they are your go-to source. Guys, fiat's reckoning is upon us. I mean, we can just look at this. The US debt is now bigger than the entire US economy. In 2012, debt surpassed GDP for the first time ever, and there's been no looking back. Basically reverse that chart, and that's the dollar priced in Bitcoin. It's going to zero, and actually anything you price in Bitcoin, it gets cheaper over time. Life gets easier on the Bitcoin standard, and after all this news, I'm with Bitcoin Sapiens, $1 million Bitcoin in 5 years, 10 million in 10 years. I mean, it's just 10th grade math at the end of the day, and even Tom Cruise gets it. Check this out.
The best financial education anyone could buy, and your ticket to entry is whatever you can afford to stack, and it'll change your life. Because I believe that once you understand Bitcoin and you start to realize that no matter how many coins you have, even if it's a fraction of a coin, that is going to lead to dollar value that you may not have ever thought you could ever achieve. So from wherever you start, once you grok Bitcoin, you realize where you're going. And when you realize where you're going, you start to feel wealthy. You start to feel abundant. It's just a matter of time. Once you make that shift and you understand that Bitcoin is going to create wealth for you, it's going to create abundance for you, you start to attract wealth and abundance from all angles. If you feel like you're living paycheck to paycheck, if you feel like you're never going to get ahead, this is how to break that cycle. Whether it's $10 a week, $25 a week, $100, whatever it is, this will break your cycle and you will be on a completely different trajectory.
Okay, that wasn't Tom Cruise, but he's still a badass. What an insane week. Things are looking up, ladies and gentlemen. Keep stacking. Valhalla awaits, and stay tuned as we get a special edition of Simply Originals, and I'll be interviewing Clint Russell, Libertarian candidate for vice president, host of Liberty Lockdown, and also the best political show with Luke Rukowski. We're gonna have a Simply ANCAP takeover, baby, so stay tuned. Be sure to follow us on Twitter for that and set those notifications. Like, share that sound money gospel, subscribe, set those notifications, give us a bump, and don't miss the #1 live Bitcoin only news show on YouTube, Simply Bitcoin Live, coming at you Monday through Friday at 12:15 Eastern Standard Time. Guys, from politics to geopolitical game theory, Bitcoin is absolutely taking over. You might want to get some in case it catches on or something. Hey, I'll catch you all next time. Peace.
If you prefer to go down with the ship, fuck you.